When I turned 18, my life took a difficult turn. My parents, Rachel and Gregory, and my twin sister, Olivia, decided there wasn't enough space for me at home, essentially forcing me to leave. For the next few years, I struggled with an unstable life, moving from one temporary living situation to another, even living in a tent at one point. I did whatever I could to get by. Despite these challenges, I eventually built a stable life and was able to buy my own house. Now, at 26, just as I've gotten my life in order, my family has suddenly appeared. Led by Olivia, who is now expecting her fourth child, they showed up at my door unannounced, looking to move in. This is the same sister who once pushed for me to be kicked out, saying there wasn't enough room for both of us in our childhood home. Growing up, I always felt like I was treated as less important than Olivia. It was clear Rachel and Gregory preferred her, and they even admitted they wouldn't have had me if Olivia hadn't been conceived. She was always the center of attention, getting all the best toys and clothes, while I barely received enough to keep up appearances. Olivia has always shown selfish, narcissistic traits, likely because of how her parents favor her. Instead of being a supportive sibling, she consistently brought me down. The only person who ever treated me kindly in our family was my grandfather, Edward. He saw how unfairly I was treated, but when he passed away when I was 15, the last bit of kindness in my home disappeared. When Olivia got pregnant as a teenager, Rachel and Gregory married her off to her boyfriend, Liam, and brought him to live in our already crowded house. This left me without even a couch to sleep on. My dad, Gregory, sometimes slept on the living room couch, so that wasn't an option either. With nowhere else to go and being told not to ask relatives for help so the family's dysfunction would stay hidden, I was completely forced out. I ended up living in a tent in our backyard, which happened after the police mistakenly brought me home during a brief period of homelessness. This setup was meant to be a reward for keeping quiet about the reality of my living situation. After years of struggle and hard work, I finally managed to improve my life both physically and emotionally. Now, as my family tries to intrude on the life I've carefully built, I'm at a crossroads, unsure how to deal with their unexpected and unwelcome return. They had once offered me a spot to live in their backyard, but only if I cleaned it up first. Despite the mess, which was littered with flour, sugar, and overrun by rodents, I accepted. At one of the lowest points in my life, I saw this as an opportunity and quickly moved in. Olivia, on the other hand, was relieved to see me go, pointing out that there wasn't enough room for me at her place. No one even asked where I was planning to go. Transforming the backyard into a livable space was tough, especially dealing with the rodent problem, but I eventually made it work. Unfortunately, the situation forced me to drop out of high school just a few months before my final exams. My friends encouraged me to stay in the backyard and finish school, but by that time, I had already given up on that path. Instead, I focused on working, relying solely on my earnings to get by. Before long, I realized I needed to improve my skills for a better future. Gregory was a service technician, and as a kid, I often played with his tools instead of toys, helping him with household repairs. That early experience came in handy later as I decided to invest in my education and eventually got a job at a car manufacturing plant. I worked hard and steadily climbed the career ladder until I became a design manager. Recently, an old friend, Ethan, who was going through a divorce, needed to sell his house quickly. Even though I was hesitant at first, the huge discount and flexible payment plan he offered were too good to pass up, so I decided to buy it. I bought a 4-bedroom house and moved in about 3 weeks ago. To my surprise, my estranged family showed up unannounced at my new home. I hadn't had any contact with them for years, and I lived 17 miles away, so their visit was completely unexpected. I suspect a neighbor who still follows me on social media might have told them where I live. When they barged in, Rachel and Gregory expressed pride in my accomplishments, but it felt strange to see them react to me owning a house at 26, especially since they were still renting. Olivia and Liam wandered around the house as if they were inspecting it to move in. When I confronted them, they vaguely claimed they were just checking on me. It was ironic that they suddenly showed interest in my life, now when I didn't need them anymore. During their visit, Olivia boldly claimed a bedroom for herself, excited about the private bathroom, as though it was already decided that they would move in. Gregory and Rachel tried to calm her down, asking her to manage her children better. In the middle of this chaos, I was shocked and immediately shut down any discussion about them moving in. The situation quickly escalated as they started pushing the idea that I had a moral obligation to house Olivia because of family duty. I stood my ground, reminding them that it was their responsibility, not mine, to provide for their children. I firmly told them to leave my home, making it clear that I wouldn't feel guilty for their poor planning or lack of space. As they left, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I was living on my own terms, free from the pressure of their unwanted expectations. I recalled how, back when I was younger, my grandfather Edward allowed my cousin to sleep on the couch, but when I asked for the same favor, he refused and kicked me out. I vented about how I had struggled, living with rodents in my employer's garage and then in a cramped apartment for 10 years, but no one from my family ever checked on me. When I shared these memories, Rachel began to cry and try to hug me, but I stopped her and insisted they leave. Liam, my brother-in-law, told me to toughen up, bringing up his own hard times and saying I had more than enough space in my house since I was single. I sharply told him to stay quiet. Olivia cursed at me for raising my voice at her husband, but I stood firm and told them they needed to leave or things would escalate. I made them leave before they could argue back. My anger was clear. I had endured their toxic and selfish behavior for too long, and now their greed was obvious. I was no longer the obedient teenager they used to manipulate. If they had pushed any further, I was fully prepared to involve the police. To clarify, Olivia never once offered to pay rent. She and Liam had been freeloading off Rachel and Gregory for over a decade, and now they seemed determined to do the same with me. Despite the clear strain this put on Rachel and Gregory, they never took any steps to encourage Olivia to become independent. Instead, they tried to dump the responsibility onto me. A week after our first confrontation, Rachel returned, but this time she was more direct. She argued that my home had enough room to house Olivia and her family, again mentioning how crowded things were at their place. I stayed firm in my refusal. When persuasion didn't work, she shifted to veiled threats, implying that my large, mostly empty house was a security risk and that having family around would be safer and helpful with household chores. I dismissed her manipulative tactics and told her clearly to leave and not come back. Just a few days later, a neighbor informed me of suspicious activity around my house. He said he had seen a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy peering through my windows and hanging around the backyard, likely trying to break in. I was grateful for his vigilance, gave him my contact information, and asked him to keep an eye on things. I had planned to install security cameras, but unfortunately, I didn't act fast enough. 5 days later, the same neighbor called to say he thought someone had broken into my home. When I rushed back, I found out he was right. Olivia and Liam had entered through a rear window. When I confronted them, Olivia tried to justify their actions, claiming they had no other choice and accusing me of being unreasonable. As I processed her audacity, Liam smugly commented on how easy it had been. I lost my temper and physically confronted him. Olivia tried to get between us, and in the chaos, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, leaving me bleeding. The situation spiraled out of control, and Olivia called Rachel and Gregory, telling them I was the aggressor. When the police arrived, they began sorting things out while Olivia and Liam frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son. Despite their pleas, I was ready to press charges against all of them. However, Olivia denied the break-in and assault, claiming it was just a family visit gone wrong and that her son's actions were only a prank. When Rachel and Gregory arrived, they immediately took Olivia's side, pressuring me to drop the charges. They banded together to defend her and tried to make me out to be the vindictive one. Faced with their collective denial and manipulation, I realized they were determined to gaslight me into submission. I was determined not to let my family rewrite the narrative of what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor stepped forward with a crucial statement, which ultimately led to the arrest of everyone involved in the assault. They spent the night in jail because Rachel and Gregory couldn't afford their bail. The next morning, while they faced trial, I was at the hospital getting treated for my injuries and making sure there were no internal damages. I took a few days off to recover and press charges for assault, also seeking compensation for my legal fees, which the court granted. Despite Rachel and Gregory's attempts to persuade me to drop the charges, I stood firm. I even threatened legal action against them for their role in orchestrating the attack. Since my nephew is a minor, he was dealt with under juvenile law and only spent a short time in a juvenile facility, with his parents held responsible for restitution, lost wages, and covering my medical expenses. Olivia and Liam were fined heavily. In an attempt to ease their financial burden, they asked the court to allow them to complete part of their fine through community service. Since the incident, things have been relatively quiet. I hope Olivia and Liam have learned their lesson and will keep their distance. However, Rachel and Gregory haven't let this go. Just yesterday, they showed up at my door and waited outside for an hour until I reluctantly let them in. They pleaded for my help, but when it became clear they were speaking on behalf of Olivia, I immediately refused to get involved. That's when they revealed their real reason for visiting. They were getting older, their home was falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me, expecting me to take them in out of duty. I confronted them about their lack of responsibility as parents. They mentioned the idea of giving their house to Olivia, which I saw as another tactic to pressure me. They even suggested that Olivia could pay rent to live in my house, and that I could use it to cover my mortgage. I firmly declined, stating that Olivia needed to handle her own financial problems without my involvement. They continued to plead, arguing that my house was too big for just one person. But I made it clear that my future plans didn't involve staying single or accommodating them out of obligation. Their attempts at emotional manipulation didn't work. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past and emphasized that I would not be guilted into giving in. It was obvious they were trying to use family ties to their advantage, but I remained firm in setting boundaries to protect my well-being. After they left, visibly upset, I closed the door behind them. Regardless of whatever names they might call me, I resolved not to give in to their demands or let them take advantage of me. This experience has been a harsh reminder of how toxic and manipulative my family can be. Despite their actions, I refuse to let them drag me back into the chaos I've worked so hard to escape. I've built a life of independence and stability, and I intend to keep it that way. Now, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter in my life, stronger and wiser from this experience. I've decided to install security cameras to ensure my home remains my sanctuary and to prevent any further intrusions. No matter how hard they try, I am determined to protect the life I've created for myself. It's not just about keeping them out, it's about finally putting myself first.